Okay, thanks, Saket. So thank you so much, guys, for coming out today on a Sunday morning. We are community healers. What we do is our purpose is to expand horizons towards the many healing modalities out there, showcase the practitioners of these modalities, and also provide access to these practitioners, because we find that there are so many folks out there who do so many things, but then we sometimes find ourselves a little hesitant to approach them or talk to them or engage them, take their time, because we don't know what exactly they do, how well they do it, and so on and so forth. And what they, sometimes we don't even know what is it that they do, but it sounds so interesting, but somehow that we're not able to find that peaceful space in between where we can pick up the phone or make an appointment and do all of that. So the purpose of this is to, number one, understand these different modalities out there. Number two is to see some of these people, see that modality in action, or learn something more about it. And the person, the practitioner who's actually presenting it, you at least have access to one person who has taken the time to share something of himself or herself with us, and allows us a little more comfort in reaching out to them and contacting them. I will, if all of you are not members of our Facebook group at this time, I will share the link shortly. Please do join. So today we have with us James. James has a varied background. He's spent time on you might have seen his profile on the All Events page, that he spent enough time on 3 continents to have permanent addresses on all, or long-term addresses was the term we use, on all 3 of them. And he's been a musician in a past life, though I'm sure he still plays. And currently he is a licensed massage therapist, which is something I've always wanted to learn, and as well as a certified hypnotherapist. And if you haven't seen his very in-depth comments on the group, just search for his name and you will see a bunch of the most interesting comments in the group, where he really takes out the time to answer stuff. Thank you so much for joining us today, James. James is in the US right now. And once again, thank you so much for joining us, James.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me.
So, the structure of these sessions are something like this. I talk to you for about a few minutes, just a few questions to kick it off, and then we'll open. Then the floor is yours for the next half an hour, 45 minutes, or around that time, if you're planning to close in the next 1 hour. And then after that, we do a Q&A, and then we close. Is that all right?
That sounds great to me.
Cool. So in that case, I'm going to continue with the same question that you were answering to Pushpa, that what is hypnotherapy, and you were answering that. If you could please start from the beginning, because you've just started recording. So sure. Over to you, James.
Okay, so hypnosis is a very natural state of learning. It's basically the most basic learning state of any organism with at least an autonomic nervous system. So everything from crocodiles all the way up through the mammalian kingdom, off into the fowl kingdom. I'm not a zoologist, so I don't know all of those technical terms, but humans function the very same way with the autonomic nervous system as do reptiles. And so we learn exactly the same way that reptiles do. We have additional functions of the mind on top of that, such as the neocortex. And so we have much more complex functions of rational and logical thought. But in the basic way that we learn, it's common to just about every organism that has at least an autonomic nervous system. So hypnosis is really just named after a Greek god of sleep, Hypnos, because if you put a Greek or Latin name to it, then it makes you sound smarter. So that's literally where the term hypnosis came from. But it's just identifying how the autonomic nervous system takes in information. So then in therapy, we use those ideas to directly train the autonomic nervous system to respond how we want it to respond. And it's no more magical than if you take your 5-year-old to a doctor and the doctor pulls out a little funny rubber mallet and hits them just below the kneecap and their leg kicks out and they go, ooh, it's magic. No, it's not magic. It's just a simple response. Now, for a lot of the 19th, 20th century, it was used for entertainment value. And so the way that you made the way you achieved the entertainment value was by making someone do something that they wouldn't normally do, but in order to get a reaction from the crowd of, ooh, it's magic, just like the kid in the doctor's office, ooh, it's magic. It's not. It's just simply giving information the way that your subconscious naturally takes it in all the time. So and again, I teach whole courses on that at the academy, but I could talk forever, and that's not really what I prepared to today. So I'll leave that answer for there.
I'm muted. Okay, so, thanks, James. So, what are the kind of people? What are the not the kind of people? What are the um, purposes that the outcomes that you deal with? I mean, why do people come to you, or do you really practice? Because I remember you were talking about being more academic. So,
Yes.
do you practice more? Do you teach more? What is it that you find yourself involved with more?
I've maintained a practice of massage therapy. I've maintained a practice of hypnotherapy, but I am an academic at heart. And so I like to teach people about the principles rather than actually working with clients on those principles. I maintain the practice so that I have the experience and I can guide my students in how to maintain and set up and run their own practice. But ideally, I just like to be in an academic environment. So I've let most of those practices go. I still have a few clients, but I'm not actively taking on any others. And instead I work with hypnotherapists to help them build their practice. So that's largely the perspective that I come out at it from now. And then you had another question, part of the question that I lost. What was the first part of the question?
I was really curious. I was curious about the kind of.
That's right.
But now I have another question. But then, so
Sure.
the other question is that: do you really, you say I have retained a few clients? Is hypnotherapy really about long-term retention of clients, or do they not, meet their goals and go away?
Mm-hmm. Some do, some don't. And it's a lot of people, once they see the effectiveness in one area, it's like it turns on the proverbial light bulb and they're like, oh, could you help me in this? Oh, what about this over here? And there's this over, and I've always wanted, and it touches on so much of what we do. Anytime you interact with someone else or something else, or you get affected by a situation, hypnotherapy can be beneficial in doing whatever you want to adjust how you respond to the world and the universe around you. So, to go back to the first question, what's it good for? I call it the but I can't seem to's. It's anytime that you want to do something, it's good for you, you believe that you should do it, but you just can't seem to do it. That's probably something that hypnotherapy can help. So I want to stop smoking, but I can't seem to. I want to lose weight, but I can't seem to. I want to respond with more patience to my kids, but I can't seem to. I want to stop freezing up in interviews, but I can't seem to. I want to be more relaxed in traffic, but I can't seem to. I want to go to sleep better or earlier and more easily, but I can't seem to. I want to sleep all through the night, but I can't seem to. I want to get to the gym, but I can't seem to. Anytime that you run into, but I can't seem to, it's probably something that hypnotherapy can help. So it touches on so much. Now, how long do clients stay? I start my students with what we call a 1-session quit smoking cessation. It's clients, about 75% of smoking cessation clients are one and done. They come in for 1 session, we take care of it, and they're done. And so it's great for building a practice because it's largely what we call paint by the numbers, cookie cutter script. They come in, you qualify, great, here's your 1 session, you're now stopped smoking and you don't need to come back. Then there's also a 3-session quit. Different criteria, about 15% of people qualify for a 3-session quit. We come in, we prepare them, then we do the 1-session quit. And then we have the miracle cure. That's for the people that aren't ready to quit, and we can work with that, but I don't know how long it's going to take because I don't know what makes you want to keep smoking. That's why we call it a miracle cure, because not only do we address the smoking, we address whatever is motivating you to want to keep smoking. From there, anything with relationships, career, sports, athletic performance, sexual dysfunction, anything that you do, hypnotherapy can help. And once, like I said, I have this one lady who came in for self-acceptance. Well, 4 sessions later, she was done with that and then went into relationship with her parents. And then 2 months later, we were done with that, and she went into a relationship with her current significant other. And 2 months later, we were done with that and went into developing her career. I've done about 30 sessions with that client so far, and we've just opened up a whole new area that they want to explore. So as long as you are effective in what you do, the client will find ways to take advantage of what you can provide for them.
That was a lovely explanation, and I'm going to steal that, but I can't seem to. I will give you credit every time I use it, I promise.
Sure. Yes.
All right, James, we are now at 10:15, and over to you and your slideshow.
Great. I think I have this set up so that I've unpaused the share. But today we'll be discussing how to create what we call NLP anchors in order to consciously and directly change your emotional state whenever you desire to do so. So we'll start by defining some things. Then I'll explain the process. I'll guide you through actually creating your own first anchor, and then cover how to practice and reinforce those anchors so they become more and more embedded into your subconscious. First, let's talk about state. The term state has a lot of different meanings depending on the context in which it's used. State can refer to conditions of consciousness, such as being asleep or awake or transcendent or out of body. State can also refer to conditions of emotional response, such as being happy, sad, excited, or depressed. And there are additional definitions of states that are much less relevant to our discussion today, so I'm not even going to bother to go over them. I'm just going to acknowledge them, that there are a lot of different ways to use the term state. Today, we'll be referring to state as an emotional state. In other words, being happy, sad, excited, frustrated, depressed, whatever. Our given emotional state of the moment determines much of how we act, think, behave, and respond in any given situation. Here's a guided example. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine that you work in sales. Let's say that you have an appointment with a prospective client at 10 a.m. immediately following your weekly staff meeting for your department. Now, in that meeting, your boss publicly confronts you about missing your quarterly quota for the 4th consecutive time and officially reduces your salary by 25%. You feel publicly humiliated in front of everyone else in the department. You're embarrassed by what your spouse will say when you get home that night, and you fear that you may now not have enough money to take your kids on your planned vacation next month. You dejectedly walk out of that meeting, down the hall, and into the conference room where your 10 o'clock appointment is already waiting for you with a scowl on their face. Let that sink in for a moment and really feel the sadness of that situation. Now, how poorly is that meeting likely to go? Now, open your eyes and return to now. Take a deep breath and just clear all of those imagined emotions out of your mind, and remember that your imagination of that event wasn't really you, wasn't even true, and didn't really happen. You might even feel like laughing out loud as the pressure of that situation just kind of dissipates like the scene of a movie you were watching. You can get caught up into it, and if you're especially emotionally sensitive like I am, it can feel really good to just let go of all of that imagination. Okay, so clear it of everything from that previous imagination. Again, close your eyes, feeling very relaxed and content, and imagine a similar but much happier situation. You still work in sales for that same company as before. You still have that appointment with your prospective client at 10 a.m. and still immediately following your weekly staff meeting for your department. However, in this meeting, it goes much better. You're receiving the annual award for the most admired agent as voted by all of your coworkers. You broke the company record for highest gross earnings in the company's history for the last 12 months, which comes with a 30% annual bonus. And your boss announces to everyone that you've been officially entered into consideration to fill the upcoming vice president vacancy from one of the original partners who's retiring next month. There's champagne and streamers and even a special cake. You're excited about telling your spouse when you get home, and now you get to take an even longer vacation with your kids next month. They are going to be through the roof excited. And you walk out of that meeting, floating down the hallway, stride into that conference room where your client is waiting for you with all the bearing and demeanor of the top salesperson you are, and the client looks up with a big smile on their face. Now imagine how that meeting is going to go. Maybe a little better, Breathe that in for a moment and just feel that excitement, feel that confidence, feel that sense of being exactly the person you want to be, in control, respected, admired, and appreciated. Now again, let go of that scene, open your eyes, and return to the now. I expect that your second meeting might go significantly better than the first meeting, and the only real difference is your emotional state. Now, you may or may not relate to the sales example, but I'm confident that you can think of many different situations in your own life where your emotional state really makes a big difference. Imagine working through a conflict with your spouse, or doing well in an interview, or being more patient with your kids, or performing better in your sport of choice, or being motivated to simply clean your house, wash your car, walk your dog, stick to your diet, exercise at the gym. The possibilities are limited only by your imagination, and it's all due to your emotional state. Imagine the real difference that your emotional state makes in your everyday life. So then, what are emotions? Well, very briefly, emotions are entirely subconscious responses to known associations. And this is important for a number of critical reasons. One, they have nothing to do with our conscious thought processes. Two, they are exclusively responses of the autonomic nervous system, ANS. And three, they don't have to be rational or logical, and often aren't. And I teach a whole course on these three things, but for today, I'm just going to acknowledge them with nothing more than a basic cursory explanation so that you understand how they relate to anchors, since that's what we're here to talk about. There are different regions of the human brain. And although there are some significant controversies in the mainstream medical community regarding the compositions, purposes, and even number of these various regions, there is little controversy in the presence and purposes of the neocortex and the autonomic nervous system. The functions of the conscious mind are processed in the neocortex, the most advanced and complex region of the human brain. It deals exclusively with rational, linear, logical thought and does not respond with any emotions of any kind. It is purely what we call cognitive. The functions of the subconscious mind, on the other hand, reside in the autonomic nervous system at the base of the brainstem. It is the oldest region of the brain across the entire animal kingdom, not just humans, and is extremely simple in comparison to the human neocortex. It is nowhere near complex enough for rational, linear, logical thought, and it thinks entirely in emotions. Exactly the same way in humans as it does in drastically more primitive species, such as reptiles, because it's the exact same system. You can think of it as your inner crocodile. The ANS has one sole function: to keep you alive. It keeps the heart pumping, the lungs breathing, the digestion going, and the cells, tissues, bones, and organs in good repair. These functions are divided into two basic subsystems: the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. And again, in a very simplified overview, the sympathetic nervous system responds to threats, and the parasympathetic handles normal operation. You can think of it in terms of wartime and peacetime. The sympathetic handles wartime, and the sympathetic handles peacetime. So what does this have to do with emotions? Well, when the ANS detects a threat, it responds with an emotion that activates the wartime sympathetic nervous system. Its job is to keep you alive, and it will and does override the input of the neocortex, what you consciously want, to whatever degree the ANS emotionally thinks is necessary in order to do its job. And since the ANS is not complex enough for rational, logical reasoning, what the ANS thinks does not have to make any rational sense whatsoever. That's why emotional state has such a dramatic impact on how we behave and interact with our environment. As part of its sole responsibility to keep us alive, the ANS has the ability to literally override our conscious desires. And when facing stress that produces a strong enough emotional response in the ANS, we can become irrational. Does that sound familiar? Have you ever dealt with someone who is so upset or frightened or hungry or sleep deprived or stressed that they became irrational? Well, that's why. However, because our neocortex is exponentially more complex than the ANS, and again, think alligator level cognitive ability, we can essentially backdoor the ANS to get it to respond how we want it to, even when the sympathetic nervous system goes into that wartime mode and stops responding to our conscious desires. You see, even though the ANS can disconnect from input it receives from the neocortex, it cannot disconnect from the physical body. Why? Because the ANS's job is to keep us physically alive. And disconnecting from the physical body would essentially be deserting its post, to continue the wartime metaphor. And apart from the most extreme of physical traumas, there is absolutely no way for it to do that. That being the case, we can almost always influence the ANS through the physical body. Think of things like taking a deep breath when you experience pain or anger. It helps calm you down because taking a deep breath directly stimulates the parasympathetic nervous system. And there's a whole world to explore there, but today we're just going to discuss it, one small slice of it. The basic takeaway is that when the ANS responds with an emotion that's sufficiently strong enough to override our conscious desires in the neocortex, we still have the ability to backdoor the ANS through the physical body. And this is where the principle of anchors comes in. Well, starts to come in. So anchors. Anchors are associations in the ANS between physical stimulus and emotional response. We organically develop a myriad of these anchors naturally because it's the way that the ANS learns. And by learns, I mean learns anything. Every single thing that you have ever learned or will ever learn in your entire life and committed to memory was, is, and will always be by creating associations in your autonomic nervous system. That's not to say that everything you learn is an anchor, because not all associations are anchors. However, all anchors are associations between a physical stimulus and an emotional response. We just figured out how to consciously teach the ANS directly rather than organically and coincidentally. So naturally occurring anchors generally vary depending on your culture, but people within a common culture will typically develop a variety of similar anchors. In America, a common anchor is the smell of freshly baked cookies. Whenever Americans smell freshly baked cookies, we generally have a decently strong and positive emotional response. Other common examples are sounds of the ocean and the smell of the sea. Another might be the howling of the wind, which could be either good or bad depending on your experiences with it, and the sounds of rain on a window. If you live in a coastal region, you might develop an anchor of the smell of freshly caught fish. And again, that could be either positive or negative for you, depending on what your experience was with those fish. Now, I've been to something over 25 countries and lived on 3 continents, but I've never been to India. So tell me, what are some common anchors that I might develop were I to live in India?
Chole bhature?
Say again?
Okay, chole bhature. So you take it's a very North Indian thing. You have this leavened dough which you kind of stretch out and deep fry. So it's like these big puffy breads of sorts, and chole is chickpeas in a spicy sauce gravy of sorts, and it's accompanied by this green chilies and carrot pickle along with a little salad and some piquant green hot chutney. Now I want chole bhature.
Okay. Yeah, the smell of clarified butter, I guess, burning in the morning on a paratha.
So the way you make clarified butter is that you, as in the West, generally makes clarified butter is to separate the milk solids from the milk fat, and you scoop out the milk solids. But what we do is we burn it a little bit more, so that the milk solids, they tend to burn a little bit and give a slightly nutty flavor to the output, which is ghee for us. So it results in a much greater aroma than the Western type of clarified butter.
Excellent. And I see that Lena wrote about the smell of tea.
Smell of tea.
I know for me personally, I love the smell of Earl Grey. It's beautiful and it makes me happy. So absolutely, the smell of tea is one I already relate to. And then I believe the name is Mega, talks about prayer sounds and temple bells. Yeah, that could be another great anchor.
True.
So any of these things that you are already recognizing as physical stimulus, whether it's touch or smell, sights and sounds associated with festivals that Pracha just wrote, if it's physical stimulus, either through sight, through the eyes, sound through the ears, touch through the through the skin, or smell through the nose, these are physical sensations that then the ANS has associated with an emotional response. We can then use those anchors to then create emotional sensations. And all of these organic anchors occur naturally. So when we consciously create anchors, we're simply using the basic nature of the autonomic nervous system in order to positively shape our emotional well-being, just like we buy food and then store it for later when we get hungry. It's the same with anchors. Since the ANS has the ability to override our neocortex, we have to build these anchors ahead of time, because we can't simply think of something else in the heat of the moment when the ANS is in wartime mode and expect it to influence our emotional response. The ANS is not going to pay attention to it. However, we can intentionally create anchors when the ANS is in peacetime mode, since that's the only time that we can get the ANS to accept the association using our conscious thought. Just as there's nothing magical about buying food and then storing it for later, there's nothing magical about creating anchors ahead of time and then using them to control our emotional state when the ANS cuts off input from our neocortex during times of stress. So how do we create these anchors? Well, we have to decide two things. One, the physical action we want to use to trigger the emotional response. And two, we have to decide what emotional response we want to have. The physical action could be anything, but some actions might work better for different situations than others. I like to use actions that are quick, undetectable by others, and that can be done regardless of what I'm doing at any given moment. Here are some common examples. Unfocusing your eyes, refocusing your eyes, flexing your big toe, pressing your fingers together, changing the pressure in your ears by flexing the back of your tongue. It can be anything that affects a physical sensation in your body. However, it's best to make it something that is very unique, because the ANS has to be able to distinguish what it means, and the ANS is not rational. So it doesn't have the ability to figure it out. It has to be clear. It also generally works better if it's something that you physically do. Now, if you can create a sound, great, but you can't always create a sound. If you can create a smell, then great, but you can't always create a smell. So making a cup of coffee or a cup of tea can create that smell, but if you don't have that available, you can't just think about that smell because the ANS has already shut off the input from the neocortex. It has to come in through the body. So selecting the emotional state is relatively easy. However, associating the emotional state is a little more complex. In order to associate an emotional state, you have to actually create the emotional state. For advanced work, this generally requires a third party, like a hypnotherapist. But for simple work, you can probably do it yourself without too much difficulty. To create the emotional state, we have to imagine a situation in which we would feel the way that we want to feel. There are some very sophisticated ways of accomplishing this with a third party, but since we're doing this by ourselves today, we'll just keep it basic. Choose a situation that's easy to imagine in your mind, where you can get yourself to feel the emotion that you want to feel just by imagining it. This literally involves self-hypnosis. So if you have experience in deep self-guided meditation, the process is very similar. For those who aren't as well versed in self-guided meditation, I'll lead you through a basic exercise of it. If this is your first experience with creating anchors, I'll guide you in creating a simple state of basic happiness. To do this, go ahead and get into a comfortable position. Close your eyes. Take a very deep, slow breath to activate the parasympathetic nervous system. Relax your shoulders and imagine a very calm color. Now, colors don't always work for everyone, so if colors aren't your thing, that's fine. Just follow the exercise as best you can so you can get a feel for how it works, understanding that there are many other ways to do this. Colors work well for me, so I'm going to imagine the color of light blue, but you can choose whatever color is best for you. I'm just going to focus on my chosen color and focus only on that color. While I'm focusing on that color, I'm going to continue to breathe extremely deeply and very slowly, making sure that I feel the air rushing down my throat when I inhale, and breathing very slowly so I don't hyperventilate, holding my breath slightly on the exhale until I feel my lungs want to take in more oxygen. And then just focusing on my light blue color as my arms and chest relax in between each breath. The next time I inhale, I'm going to brighten the intensity of my color along with my breathing, making it a more vibrant shade of blue as my lungs fill to just about maximum capacity, holding it just briefly, and then gently releasing all of the air as my light blue color returns to normal. Each time that I breathe in, the light blue color intensifies, and each time I breathe out, the light blue color returns to normal. And each time I breathe in, I gently smile, enjoying my light color blue and feeling that happiness that may already be starting to fill me, spreading through my body. As the more I can feel that happiness, the less I think about my breathing, and the more I enjoy my color, spreading that feeling, smiling as I spread it throughout my entire body, brightening and smiling, relaxing, and feeling that happiness, spreading it all throughout my body. And at least one more slow cycle, feeling that happiness, feeling it everywhere. And in a moment, at the very moment I tell you, you will take hold of that feeling and be able to call it to you. At that very moment, your eyes will open and you will be holding that feeling in 3, 2, 1, now. Eyes open, hold that feeling. Good. Now, if you're able to hold on to that feeling and you have it right now, that's excellent. You have very good at this. It generally takes more than one attempt to really hold that feeling. And in a moment, but not before, I'll guide you back into your color and then walk you through the process of performing your chosen action and then attaching that feeling to it. So you have a chosen action, use that action that you've chosen. And if you haven't chosen an action yet, we'll use what I call a finger press, where you right index finger gently but strongly presses into your right thumb, and we'll call it your finger press. So as I count backward from 5 to 0, allow your eyes to close and return to your chosen color of happiness. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Eyes locked tight, sealed tight, gently and comfortably, and as you return to your chosen color of happiness. One more breath in, and then slowly out, and let your color fade to nothing, and you let go of your feeling, and now just peacefully existing now, feeling only the breath in your lungs as you continue to breathe slowly and gently. And now, clearly and deliberately perform your chosen action or finger press. Do that right now. And as you do it, you immediately bring back your feeling of happiness, spreading it through you in a rush and smiling as you do so, seeing that beautiful color in your mind, feeling that happiness spread throughout your body again, filling yourself with that happy feeling, and just breathing and smiling and feeling happy. And slowly, we're going to repeat that process now. So on your next day, exhale, letting go of the feeling and the color and relaxing your fingers, returning to peaceful emptiness and just breathing. In a moment, I'll count down from 3, and when I tell you, again, perform your finger press. 3, 2, 1, now. And flood back the happiness, spreading through you, smiling to reinforce it, feeling so good, filling you with that happiness, holding it and intensifying it, and then exhaling and letting it fade, returning to emptiness and just continuing to breathe. And then getting ready to repeat the finger press. 3, 2, 1, now. And flooding back the happiness, spreading through you and smiling and intensifying and releasing back to emptiness. And again, 3, 2, 1, now. And intensifying that happiness even more this time and holding it and releasing back to emptiness. Waiting, peaceful, calm. And 3, 2, 1, now flooding through you and holding it and fading. Still smiling because it feels good, and breathing and peaceful. And 3, 2, 1, now, and reveling in that beautiful happiness and not letting go this time and just enjoying it. Move it all throughout your body and your soul and your mind through every cell and fiber, breathing it in, big smile, loving this control that you have and not letting go, but letting it settle and enjoying keeping that feeling with you. Smile on your face. And in a moment, we'll count upward from 0 to 5, feeling very calm, very happy, and very alive. At 1, locking in that happiness and locking in that finger press. At 2, emotionally peaceful. 3, mentally alert. 4, physically aware. And 5, eyes opening, wide awake. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, eyes opening and wide awake. Check in with your body. Feel every part. Fingers, hands, arms, torso, hips, legs, feet, toes, head, ears, nose, mouth, chin, fully return to a happy, conscious state, completely alert and fully aware. That's how you create an anchor. The one we worked on today is a very simple one. And even though you'll need to practice that anchor by the same process of performing the finger press and recreating the feeling, the more you practice it, the stronger the anchor becomes. It often helps to have someone guide you through the practice, but on simple anchors with simple emotions, you can probably manage it by yourself, and you'll get better the more you practice. The more you practice creating and reinforcing anchors, the more proficient you'll become at creating them. But it's like learning anything else. It takes practice, practice, practice. So to reiterate the actual process, you start with a focused state of concentration. You create the desired feeling. You release the feeling. You perform your physical action and immediately bring back that feeling, intensifying the feeling and then releasing the feeling, relaxing, and then repeating over and over and over. And the more you practice, the more embedded the anchor becomes. And then, just to recap today's session, we define state, emotions, the neocortex, and the autonomic nervous system. We explained the process of creating an anchor, and then we guided you in creating your own anchor. And lastly, we reviewed how to practice that anchor to reinforce it into your subconscious ANS. Thank you, Sid, for allowing me to conduct this session today.
That was lovely, James. Thank you. And Pushpa, I gotta say, you had the biggest, most beautiful smile on your face.
Thank you, Sid.
I wish others had switched on their cameras so we could see their big smiles as well. But only you and Jayanti and have got your cameras on. Ah, there's Ajay Malhotra. Your questions, please. Anything you felt, any comments, any questions, please do bring them on. Please raise your hands and we'll. Okay, actually, I meant the other raising hands. But cool, Pushpa, go on.
Okay, no, you can go ahead with the other one first.
No, other mera matlab tha ki there's this reaction, like this raising hand.
Okay.
But you raise your physical hand, so go on, please do.
So I had a question here. So I got into the art of being with my breath since 2012.
Mm-hmm.
And so the emotional impulses that we talked about today, now there's enough space between the two.
Okay.
So it's like a screen, the emotions
Mm-hmm.
come, you visit them, you
Yes.
don't really get triggered anymore.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I've kind of understood with my own journey. So I think I'm looking for validation, whether it's I'm on the right track kind of a thing.
Oh, absolutely. And in fact, I would suspect that part of what you're describing deals with the order of sensation, physical sensation versus emotional sensation. About half the population experience physical sensation before emotional sensation. And about the other half experiences emotional before physical. And it sounds like you've developed a very good distinction between that order of sensation, which allows you then to go more towards the emotional side and experience that emotional sensation without necessarily the physical association with it. And so it's a much more advanced state than most people are able to achieve, but it opens up whole worlds for how you can use it.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much.
So Pushpa, one little comment from me as well on that. So I've been doing the same thing, but in your case, you seem to have tried. In my case, I've been on the receiving end of a whole lot of, let's say, public commentary, which has made me, put a gap between the event, the trigger, and the reaction. So as a result, I too don't get triggered. I get triggered very, very rarely now. But at the same time, there are some very subtle triggers which might not necessarily fit our definition of the trigger, but they still cause a bit of a reaction. It could be something as simple as somebody not reacting or doing something the way we might want them to do, and that brings about a bit of a disappointed thing, and that disappointment triggers something else, like maybe eating or breaking a fast or something like that. So that's just what happens with me. So my thing now is triggering is a thing of the past. Now triggering as in those major triggers, but now my focus is to try and work on these subtle, tiny little triggers here and there. So that's what I'm working from.
Okay.
James Maker, okay, you answered that. Okay, cool. So James, anything to say about that? So I think both Pushpa and I are speaking of big triggers largely first, but I don't know how small triggers affect Pushpa, little things. But I do have those tiny little things every once in a while, very subtle little things which tend to affect my way of being. Can those also be managed by anchors?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, there's, I would suspect that the vast majority of the time, we are not consciously aware of our emotional responses. So for example, let's say that right now, we're meeting over Zoom. You and I have never actually been in the physical presence of each other. You're halfway around the world, but I'm interacting with you and I'm seeing some of your body language. Now, I won't necessarily consciously identify what your eyebrow raising this much might mean, but emotionally, I will read that as some sort of subconscious clue, and then I will interpret it based off of an association. And I might not consciously be aware of, ooh, now I am slightly nervous. I think that Sid might not be understanding what I'm saying, or, oh, he finds that incredibly intriguing. I need to explore that more because he wants more information about that. Or I might interpret it as, I wonder if he's focusing on something else, and then that causes an anxiety in me that I don't have your attention. Now, it may have just been that a fly landed on your head and you were reacting to something completely unrelated. And I will still have that emotional response based off of whatever association I had internally without ever consciously realizing it. For example, have you ever known someone that could walk into a room and know something was wrong without anyone saying anything? They're reading those subconscious signals of body language, and they're not consciously identifying them. And all of that is something in the room triggered an emotional response in the person, but they have no idea what it was. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Right. Anybody else? Questions, guys? Any other questions? This is not usually so logically explained, but it might not be that easy to do. I mean, if you just go through the steps in your mind now, could we just go back to that slide, James, about
Sure.
where we have the steps? So folks can just revisit the steps.
Okay, so which steps? These?
This one, yes.
Okay.
So I'd like you to please note this down or take a screenshot or something like that, so we can practice it on our own. And I still can hear James' words in the way the script that he was following, what he was saying. So so we can do that. And yeah, so if you just revisit that, then you can perhaps have some questions come up in your mind that how will I do it on my own?
I wanted to ask you something, James.
Yes.
Like how the example you gave when you enter a room and how the energy in the room kind of triggers you, as in you start thinking whether you're whether that person is looking at me or what are they thinking about me and all that bit. But so through my own experience is that there was, when you start anchoring into your breath, and so the outside really stops influencing you. It really doesn't come to in context with these stimuli anymore, I believe. I think it's the other way around, where the chatter kind of in your mind starts to slowly get dissolved.
Yes.
And then you're just anchored in your own self.
I have a great example. I have an American bully dog, very closely related to a pit bull. And when we got her, she was a very, very nervous dog. Over time, that nervousness went away, which is literally the ANS just slowly reassociating those triggers to a different response. Now, when she is left alone, she enjoys just curling up in her crate and in her bed.
Yes.
Whereas when we first got her, if we left her alone, she'd destroy the crate. Over time, organically, naturally, she reassociated in her subconscious that this is a nice, peaceful, comfortable, safe place. And I don't need to worry about where my food and water are going to come from and whether my pack is going to return to me. Okay. So they do degrade over time if they're not reinforced, and they will be replaced by others if something else is reinforced instead. So which flows nicely into Nydia's question about emotional and angular situation. Are anchors the best way to tame triggers? Changing a trigger is different than creating an anchor. A lot of the process is the same, but it's kind of like when, if any of you have kids or have ever dealt with a 2-year-old, you don't try and reason with a 2-year-old. If your 2-year-old is liking a toy and you take the toy away, the 2-year-old will cry. And we don't blame the 2-year-old. We understand they haven't developed that conscious logical process in the neocortex yet. And the only way to get the child to stop crying is either to give them back the toy or give them another toy instead. So when we're talking about taming different triggers, what we have to do is we have to identify what's already triggering them. Figuring out, and you basically follow the emotion back to the trigger. It's kind of like water. Water will always flow downhill. You follow the water and you will find the lowest point. So you follow the emotion and it will take you to the trigger. Once we've identified the trigger, we don't worry about changing the trigger. We just take the emotional response that it has and replace it with something different. So we replace it the same way as creating the anchor. It's just that we already have the established trigger, which is generally not a physical response. It's not a physical trigger. It's some emotional trigger. It's some and I'm getting confused with terms because just like state has multiple meanings, the term emotional can be used in different ways. And so it starts to become, I have to be very precise in how I'm using the term or it becomes confusing. Yeah. But when you have an intellectual interpretation of something, then that will trigger an emotional response because of literally an imagination
Yes.
And this is where it gets really fun, but very complex. And it's like a whole other session. And I would love to do one on it, but it's way too complex. It's this picture of circles that I draw out to help explain it. But it's fun, but terribly more complex than I have time for right now. So literally, you think of it, we'll just keep it real simple. You think of it, and then the ANS believes that it's real, and then it takes its interpretation of what you have thought about, and then has the emotional response.
Yeah.
Because it's still taking input from the neocortex. Okay, so creating external anchors to the body is for when it's not paying attention to the neocortex, and that's where it's different. And so you identify whatever the ANS is interpreting as a trigger, and then swap it out for another emotion using the same process of imagination. And I feel like I really talked my way around that answer without giving an acceptable, fully understandable answer. So for that, I apologize. And hopefully you got what I meant. I'm feeling terribly inarticulate about it at the moment.
Saket has a question.
I'm sorry?
Saket Rai has a question. Go ahead, Brother Rai.
Yes.
Brother Sid, I don't have a question, but since I've worked both with breathwork, some mindfulness and hypnotic anchors, my 2 cents would be that I'm a lazy guy, and the advantage of being lazy is that we tend to gravitate towards the most efficient system.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the only reason I gravitate towards hypnotic anchors. There are really simple way to actually, if I can use the word, install and trigger them back and change the emotional states.
Mm-hmm.
And then I find them perfect. You can do it on anybody and everybody. Doesn't matter the age, gender,
Mm-hmm.
sex, anything doesn't matter. They don't have to practice anything on a daily basis. And it takes about 10 minutes to do so if you're doing a very simple one. If you're doing a complex one, maybe half an hour and nothing more than that. And once it's there, it's there.
Mm-hmm.
It's there. You simply keep on using it, keep on using it, keep on using it, and you can have as many as you want. So I really love them. Thanks, James. Thanks for explaining them in such a wonderful and beautiful way.
Thank you. You're very welcome.
And before we sign off, I received a private message from someone who says that Pushpa Rawal has such a lovely, beautiful, soothing voice. So there you go, Pushpa. I thought you should know that.
Yes.
Thank you so much, whoever that person is.
So that is that. So any other questions, guys? James, you were saying
Omega
something?
has a question in the chat. How can I use this to help with better sleep or to silence a very chatty brain at 3 a.m.? That would largely depend on what's triggering the sleep disturbance. So what we would do is in session, not in a hypnotic session, but in the cognitive portion of the session, we would follow the emotion. What emotion do you experience it? When do you experience it? There are lots of different diagnostic tools that we can use, and which ones would be more effective than others would be largely dependent on your circumstances. And we would delve into, that physical sensation versus emotional sensation. Which do you experience first? Which really impacts everything in your personality. So I've been following that backward, following that emotion, and those clues and signs, we would identify the trigger. Once we identify whatever is triggering you to have disturbances in your sleep or to have a very chatty brain at 3 a.m., then we go in, and it's the same process. We're always either associating an emotion to a trigger or reassociating a different emotion to an existing trigger. So hopefully that answers your question.
His iPhone says yes, I think. Sorry, Megha said yes. All right, cool, brilliant. So I guess we're done, and I'm going to just paste anyone here who's not a member of Community Healers. Okay, let me just paste the link for you nonetheless. This is our Facebook group link. Please join us here in case you are not a member. James, thank you so much. That was an absolutely lovely session. And And if this was your quick, your quick shortcut version, I would absolutely love to attend your other workshops whenever you're having them, to see the full version. This was wonderful. This clarified a lot of things. You've given us a background, you've given us a process, and you also guided us through it with an example. So wonderful. Thank you so much for taking the time out to do this, James. I know it's getting late over there, and thank you everyone for taking the time on a Sunday morning to visit this session, and we'll see you next time. James, thanks again, and see you around on the group.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much,
You take
James.
care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
Vibha, please message me on Facebook.
I would love to send this video to my son, in fact,
Right, we'll be uploading this on Facebook, or not Facebook, sorry. We'll be uploading this on YouTube shortly. So
because it's very informative and very lovely way. The explanation was so good.
Definitely.
And I was feeling like I'm listening to a lecturer's class in a college, and I was just silently listening to him. It was so wonderfully. Thank you, James.
Okay, I think we should look at your first slide again, James. If you could you take us to slide number 1, the title slide.
Sure.
It's wonderful.
So
Actually, I can do this.
just by pressing the home key.
I can do that. That's not what I wanted.
Okay, so what I was taking him to title slide because okay, there he is, because James is the director of hypnotherapy at an institution, so perhaps that's why you felt that way.
Yes.
Yeah, seriously. And my son is now in US, so probably I will recommend you to him. It's
excellent.
Really wonderful.
So, brilliant. All right, guys, close the session now.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
Thanks, James.
Bye-bye.
See you soon.
Thanks, Sid.
Bye-bye.
Bye.